Welcome to Community Spotlight. I'm your host, Leah Longbrake. Today's Spotlight is on community development. Our guest is Director of Community Development for the City of Cleveland, Tania Menesse. Welcome.
Thank you.
So start off by telling us how long you've been with the City of Cleveland.
So I've been with the city just a little over a year.
And how's the role been going?
Well, you know, it's definitely, it was drinking from a fire hose, but once you've done everything once, you have some sense of how to pace, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to rebuild our team and to work with the community partners that are a big part of our success.
Now, the Department of Community Development, there's so many layers to it. I don't think people really realize. Tell us what the department does and how you support the community.
Sure. Well, you know, our core mission is to improve the quality of life of the City of Cleveland's residents, and we do this primarily through neighborhood revitalization, providing affordable housing, and the type of assistance that communities need to rebuild their neighborhoods. We are the grantee of the Federal Housing and Urban Development Funds. We utilize those in 4 basic areas within our department. The first is neighborhood services, which are direct services to our community's residents. So there are programs like the Senior Home Repair Program, where we partner closely with the Department of Aging as they help send seniors to us. We income qualify those seniors because we're focused on supporting those who are most in need in our neighborhoods. And we will do one service for a senior, sometimes with a value of as high as $17,000. We may be replacing their roof, their gutters, a porch. One service they can apply for normally in a 10-year period, and we're trying to be able to support our seniors even more than that. But that's one major program. A second is our Repair Home program, which is something we brought back over the last 18 months. And this is a full home rehab. It isn't a grant program, it's a loan program for our residents, but it's at almost 0% interest rate. We do recycle those loans, which is a great way for us to continue to sustain the program. But we can spend almost $80,000 on a single family home or doubles and work on what is really a whole house rehab.
That's not just seniors.
No, that's across the board. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. And then we run the lead remediation program out of our department. For the last 6 years, we have been the proud recipient of HUD's lead remediation grant, where we primarily do whole house abatement. So it can be $10,000 to $12,000 of abatement. We work with families. We will bid those projects, work with the contractors, ensure the specs are correct, help families relocate for the week because they can't be in the home while we're doing the work, and get them back in. And so we will often do a job in less than a week on the lead remediation side. And then the final piece under neighborhood services is our consumer affairs team, where we take calls from residents, several hundred a year, and go out to normally 200 to 300 events a year. And calls can be anything from a fraudulent issue on a credit card to an issue with a contractor, to a senior who really just needs some support finding resources that they need. And we have 3 consumer affairs specialists in that team. So those are all neighborhood services. That, again, we kind of always define that as our services that support residents directly. Our neighborhood development team is what we sort of call our toolkit of neighborhood development, and we partner with nonprofit and for-profit developers, as well as our community development corporations, are what are normally larger projects. So it's everything from the low-income housing tax credits that come through the state of Ohio. We help support our teams with letters to the state, and those are normally our larger affordable housing projects that get built in the city. And permanent supportive housing, where we have partnered with the Homeless Coalition in Cuyahoga County to ensure that there's permanent supportive housing for our homeless. So those are the largest projects. Normally, those also are supported by our Housing Trust Fund, because even with the low-income housing tax credits, there's normally a gap. In neighborhood development, we administer our land bank, which is 15,000 properties, which is a blessing and a curse for the community.
It's a lot.
The significant positive is it gives the city a seat at the table on large and small development projects. It's allowed us to support everything from summer sprouts, gardens, to projects that NOACA is doing in terms of dealing with runoff, to larger economic development efforts and infill housing. And then these projects that we just talked about, the large affordable housing projects, are often on land bank land because that makes those projects even more affordable. And then scattered site infill housing throughout our communities. And then we really work closely with our community development corporations on similar projects. And the Housing Development Office administers most of the financial supports within neighborhood development. Our last group within neighborhood development is the storefront commercial revitalization program, which is really where you see the impact on the street. It makes a significant difference. We'll do about 30 projects a year. Partner by providing as much as a 40% abatement on projects, and really help building owners. Sometimes as important or more important than the funds is the design support to help them understand the neighborhood context and what will really fit with their historic building. And while those projects seem isolated, they're really sometimes the difference in making a commercial street really get its bones back and feel like a place you'd want to shop.
Yeah, it's a fantastic program. And for those small business owners in particular that aren't familiar with the program, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So you can apply just for a sign as a business. And there's a cap on those funds. But generally what we try to do is work with you on the entire exterior of your building because we want to ensure that we're not just dealing with a door or a window, but that you really feel the whole impact of the street. We'll walk you through what is generally, most of the time, these buildings are in historic districts, so there are requirements based on the Landmarks Commission and guidelines that a building owner needs to follow. And again, these are building owners and business owners who are there to run their business, who wouldn't innately know these things. So we have two designers who will come out and help write the scope of work, help with the designs, give the building owner or business owner options on how they might want to proceed, often help them with the bidding documents. They will get normally 3 bids on the projects, and then contract with them to get it done.
Really help from the ground up.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's probably the message for most things that we do in community development is whether it's neighborhood services or a land bank application or a housing development project, we really are there to help consult through the process. Federal funds are so important, but they're not without complication on how to use them.
Right.
And the idea that people come out of the womb knowing how to do an environmental review is just not realistic.
It's not feasible.
So what we really serve to do is from the beginning of a project where you're writing specs or you're thinking about the project really to the time when you're signing off on documents and everything from that groundbreaking on through, we're really there to help walk you through the process. And that kind of brings us to the third team is administrative services. And in some ways I feel like that's the group that's most or least well understood.
That's the banking relations, right?
You know what, actually banking relations is sort of the fourth part that we're growing, which is why I hesitate. We have 3 main divisions and then banking relations is becoming more and more of an important part of what we do. Administrative services is the non-sexy but incredibly important budgeting, accounting, compliance side of what's really important to administer federal grants properly, but probably more important to the community is it's our vehicle. It's really a $9 million philanthropy. We work to put about $7 million with our council people and our community development corporations into the neighborhood development work that they do. And then every year we run an RFP also for nonprofits to be able to apply to community development corporation. To be able to apply to community development for funds, they can apply for grants for seniors, for youth programs, and for family services. And then we also just have a section that's very focused on our housing partners to help get people into homes and help them understand sort of what they need to do from a home maintenance standpoint and what it's like to deal with a mortgage and everything in between. So that's administrative services. And that's really for many of our community development corporations, our main funding source. We are really working closely with our community development corporations to help them diversify. On the neighborhood development side, a lot of the time, the work that they do from a development standpoint, whether it's housing or commercial projects, that's a way for them to diversify their funding streams and also to bring value to the community.
It's nice to know that connection, because I know CDCs have been getting a lot of attention for their work in helping in the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
All the new housing with like Slavic Village and Ohio City and so forth. So it all is in partnership with you.
Yes, yes. And I think the partnership is the word that I think we really have been trying to stress, is that there's no one entity that can do this on their own. The community development corporations are so important because they're out in the neighborhoods talking to residents, talking to business owners, have a really strong sense of what the community needs. They're the ones we look to hold the neighborhood meetings, to work with people to get input on changes that may be coming from some of our partners in planning and economic development. But they look to us then to help them with the funding for these larger projects, and then, as I said, to navigate the federal funding mechanism to make sure that they're complying properly and utilizing the funds appropriately. But we end up funding what are the larger projects, but then also so many of the services that they provide which are really invaluable to people, whether it's employment services or youth services in their neighborhoods. Yeah.
You mentioned lead earlier. With the homes. One of the big initiatives right now is the Lead Safe Coalition. Can you speak to us more about that initiative and the other initiatives that you have coming up this year?
Yeah, so we're really excited to be part of the Lead Safe Coalition. There are 300 people who have come out over the last 6 to 9 months to be a part of the initiative. I am a part of the resource committee, and so now that Cleveland City Council and Building and Housing and the Department of Health have done the really hard work to put legislation together with input from the community and the coalition. Much of the talk, as it should be, is okay, now that the legislation is out there and the mandate is there, how are we going to help our landlords and our residents meet the conditions of the legislation? Because we know, with the help of Case Western University, that has done a lot of research in partnership with the Department of Building and Housing, that probably 2/3 of our landlords are mom and pop landlords. They are landlords who many of them don't know that there are issues in their properties, because it's not like what people think, where everything's falling apart, so wouldn't you know that there's a lead issue in your house? A lot of the time it's dust, it's because you actually did a really good thing by replacing siding or doing some painting, and now there's residue that needs to be dealt with. So part of it is education for our landlords and our residents, and then the second part is certainly monetary support. And so we have been looking at what is the universe out there that we're going to need to support. We will be pulling together landlords to talk to them about different support systems that we think we can put into place. The coalition is looking at a resource center where it really would be the hub for whether it's landlords or contractors, homeowners, community development corporations, really all of those people to come together and ask questions about lead, to check out equipment that they may need for clean, safe practices, to sign up for workforce development training, because we know we don't have the workforce today to do this work.
There's a lot of homes, as you said.
Yes, yeah. We have about 80,000 rentals in the city, and based on the estimates that we're seeing, probably 30,000 of them will need some sort of intervention. Now, that could again be clean, safe practices, which are not a huge cost, but it could be, all the way up to close to what we see from our full lead abatement that we do through the HUD program, which can be, as much as $10,000 or $12,000. So, and kind of everything in between. So helping our landlords understand that work, looking to see how many of them can bear that cost on their own. Would need some grants to help do that work, but then also I think it's a really exciting time because many of our landlords could do the work with a loan product, and so we'll be looking to our community development finance institutions and our banking partners who would be working with us. We'll have an intermediary who will run the Lead Safe Home Fund. We're going to put an RFQ out on the street soon to look to see who would be appropriate to run that fund, who already has some of the mechanisms in place to do so, so they're not starting from scratch, and could help, again, landlords work through what type of support structure they're going to need to be successful. We have, an 18-month ramp-up period for this, but that'll be there before we know it.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've, spent a lot of time with estimates, but now really working with our partners to assess the need and put the fund together is the focus for our section of the coalition.
And like you said, the partnership is the key for all of this.
Absolutely. I think that one of Mayor Jackson has said at the launch of this coalition, and he says it all many times, is that when we've really been successful in an initiative in the community, it's when we do it as one Cleveland, as one community, and really seeing the strength of the public-private partnership and the fact that we come at it from very different angles. A lot of the time we have different views, but I think that ultimately will make us stronger in our ability to move this forward.
Well, we mentioned more initiatives were coming.
Yeah.
One in particular is the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative.
Yeah.
What is this initiative, and what are the goals that you're hoping for at the end of this?
Sure, and it ties in well with the banking relations that I didn't talk about before. So as I started in the department, we have one person who is really focused on banking relations. And what we're realizing is that while the federal funds are so important to the work that we do, ultimately the $30 million or so that come from the federal government are not going to be able to rebuild our neighborhoods, right? We have to determine how we invite the private sector, specifically on the east side of Cleveland, to really become active in lending on the east side. And there are many reasons why that hasn't been the case, but we've been really focused on what types of products do we need to revitalize our neighborhoods? And that kind of brought us to the middle neighborhoods piece, is that what we're realizing is the most affordable home often is the rehabbed home, right?
Yeah.
As we are moving, there's still demolition that needs to happen in our city, and we know that, but as we are trying to look more at how do we incentivize people to purchase and rehab a home, what we're realizing is that there really are not lending products to do that. Right, and then we have housing partners who are sort of willing to step into the fray. We're pleased to be supporting CHN, which is in their Housing Capital program, to become a CDFI. That they can be a mechanism for the banks to lend through them to help homeowners or potential homeowners and investors who may not be banking ready from a credit perspective, but really are ready in many ways to own a home and help them through that. So that journey of beginning to understand where we may not have the realtor community and the appraisals yet for the new home development that we think should be happening on the east side, we do have the market there. And one of our major initiatives over this next year, and I think ongoing, is to really help the financial community see that there's income on the east side of Cleveland, that there are borrowers, there are people who are interested in living in the community, and to better understand and partner with them. Because I keep coming back to this, because we really need the financial institutions, many of which have come to us and said, work with us on these gaps in the marketplace and get us to the point where we can underwrite and appraise these loans. Okay, so now I'm coming to the middle neighborhoods question. So that was the banking side.
Yeah.
As we were looking at that across the city, where we really do know that there are gaps in the market, what we're finding is that in our stable neighborhoods, which we're calling now our middle neighborhoods, these are the neighborhoods that throughout the challenges in Cleveland have continued to be our strong residential neighborhoods where people have often stayed despite the challenges, have weathered the storms, and have often been what have kept our city going. And They are not disenfranchised or impoverished enough to qualify for federal funds, but they're not strong enough yet for the market to have completely taken over.
What are some examples of those
So,
neighborhoods?
so perfect. So where we're seeing that is, places like Lee Harvard and Collinwood, Bel Air Puritas, Old Brooklyn. These are neighborhoods where they need support because they could tip down or up depending on whether they get the support that they need. The good news is many of them have some very strong pockets. And then some weaker areas. And we are in the process of really understanding what that means. I will say that middle neighborhoods was something that many of us were exposed to in Cleveland based on a book that Paul Brophy wrote called On the Edge. He was here in Cleveland 2 years ago for a talk, and there's some other communities that are focused on middle neighborhoods and what types of interventions need to happen in middle neighborhoods in order to support them. So we started learning from them. We were fortunate enough to receive a grant from the Cleveland Foundation to fund a fellow for 2 years, and he started in the spring and is just getting going in terms of researching these neighborhoods. Because the reason I hesitated initially to call them out, even though we kind of innately know them, is we're really starting to define what that means and to ensure that we can talk about them in a way that helps people understand what tools will be needed, and that it's not necessarily across the board, because there are pockets or some of the same kinds of characteristics in some of our other neighborhoods. So the tools that we pull together, while they may not be something that can be utilized all throughout Clark Fulton, there may be areas in Clark Fulton that border Tremont where the interventions make sense. Or there may be areas of Collinwood that are stronger where the tools that we're looking at for middle neighborhoods could be helpful, and other parts of that neighborhood that aren't ready for it. So it's not an all or nothing proposition is what we're learning, and we're still pretty early in that definitional phase, but we know that middle neighborhoods need a few things to really kind of rebuild and solidify. One, and it seems like a silly thing, but in Cleveland, I think we've seen this, is pride of neighborhood, pride of place, pride of community. When Cleveland, over these last 5 years, Clevelanders started feeling really good about where they live, wearing Cleveland t-shirts, proudly exclaiming that we're absolutely that we're from Cleveland. What a difference that made in terms of how other people viewed us. And it's very similar on the neighborhood level. We need to rebuild that sense of pride and place. And it's not that, Old Brooklyn has kind of been the leader in this work, and they've really created a culture that says we're Old Brooklyn, we're proud of who we are, and people have really gravitated to that. So some of that cultural shift, what's your history? Lee Harvard has an incredibly strong history of middle class ownership and how that community was developed. How do we really imbue that in our residents again and teach that in the school so kids have an understanding of that? So it's not just about dollars and cents, it's about building that sense of community. But it is also about the lending side of things and looking at how do we demonstrate that the market is there, and that in middle neighborhoods actually that we don't need grants. These are really sustainable communities where lending can work and function. And then something we're really going to look at that some of the other middle neighborhoods haven't as much is how important the commercial district is in the neighborhood.
They need jobs, and people need jobs, and it's a cycle. And
these are more the neighborhood servicing businesses that build community as much as anything. A place to walk to have a cup of coffee, where you see friends, where you can go to the grocery store. That sense of community is really important in middle neighborhoods. So we're just starting on that initiative, but it is a really important one.
Sounds like a very important and fantastic initiative.
Yeah.
We have much more to dive into,
but
we need to take a quick break.
Okay.
So we'll be right back with more Community Spotlight. Welcome back to Community Spotlight. I'm your host, Leah Longbrake. Today's Spotlight is on community development, and with us is the Director of Community Development for the City of Cleveland, Tania Menesse. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So we were talking initiatives before the break,
Yeah.
and another great one is the Community Engagement Healthy Homes Initiative. Tell us about this.
Yeah, sure. So this was something we were really excited to have happen through the budget process. There was an initiative about 5 years ago called the Code Enforcement Partnership, and it was really focused at the time of the recession on stabilizing our housing stock, something that was really necessary as we saw people unfortunately have to abandon their homes, and when code enforcement was really key. As building and housing has been able to ramp up with the passage of the income tax, there is so much more focus on code enforcement, but there's still a real need to look at the quality of life of our residents and housing issues in our community. And so we're kind of looking at this as code enforcement 2.0 or the best of, and then moving into an area that we feel and we appreciate that council also saw was really critical to our community, and that is to have an initiative that's again focused on the quality of life of residents, and more often than not, their housing is a big part of that. And how it will be deployed, and we're just getting there. We've hired a manager who will be managing the community engagement specialists who will be out in the field. They'll be in partnership and housed in our community development corporations, really looking at neighborhood areas. They'll work with the executive director and housing specialists at the community development corporations and the council person and building and housing to be able to look at areas of focus within the neighborhood. But in this case, rather than walking the neighborhood looking for issues, and they were never really writing violation letters, but referring those to building and housing. Here, they're going to be really looking at meeting with those residents to talk to them about the programs that the community has to offer. So it could be anything from things that the city provides to partners to things like seniors who are not on the homestead exemption and could be, and by being on the homestead exemption then would get discounts on their water and their sewer bills. Helping with seniors who may have issues in their homes, kind of starting there and then looking at where maybe we should be bringing in the Department of Aging to help with other issues that they're facing. So it's much more of a partnership with the residents and opening those doors to other services and support. We also very much see them as an extension of the Lead Safe Coalition. We'll be training all of the community engagement specialists to be lead risk assessors, which means that they can provide technical assistance to residents. Again, before there is that first test that has to be applied in a home, a landlord or a renter a tenant could call the Community Development Corporation and have one of our specialists come out and just help them assess, where there may be issues in the home that they could address on their own and then bring in the Lead Resource Center, for example.
What are some codes? You mentioned the code enforcement. What would be examples that people could be looking out for?
And it's not always the case, but a good indication of whether a home may need some support is if you're seeing chipping and peeling paint, if you're seeing steps to a porch that are broken, a porch that's falling, a gutter that is lagging, or
roof issues.
Yeah. So the intent is to identify some of those issues and then to write to the homeowner or the tenant, landlord, and indicate, hey, we've noticed these issues. We have some programs within the city. One of the things I didn't mention, but it's really part of this broader community engagement healthy home initiative, is our ability to restart our paint program. We're starting fairly small, but this would be an indication. Hey, you could take advantage of a grant to paint your home. Here's how to contact us. Please do if you'd like some support. And hopefully, many homeowners and tenants will reach out. Otherwise, we'll be partnering with area churches, with the rec centers, with block clubs and things like that to get the word out, because we know often, when you're the first outreach is somebody you don't know, or it's about a problem that you have, people aren't always so excited to engage and very understanding. But hopefully, the intent is to lead with, we have things that can help you.
There's a lot of free programs that people don't realize.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of ways that people need assistance that sometimes aren't even monetary to that extent, right? We really are hoping that we'll be able to link people to childcare programs, to link parents and others in the home maybe to a workforce opportunity that is going on. And depending on where you are in the city, that could be a myriad of different things. And so the intent is that while the team initially will be very focused on the paint program and on assisting from a lead perspective, that they'll have information about a lot else of what the city and our partners do, and that their role will change over time, and that it'll be a cohort, which I think will be really nice, because it'll be a team of people who will be helping and learning, and we think will be kind of our next phase of community development professionals in this community, by starting out really focused more on serving residents. Then often what we do with the federal money is much more bricks and sticks oriented. This is a lot more people oriented.
Tell us about RTAP, the Residential Tax Abatement Program.
Yes. So it's funny, the things that we spend so much time on that often people So today in the city of Cleveland, if you are building a new home or doing a substantial rehab, you can apply through our department for tax abatement. You can apply for 15 years, and that means that you do pay taxes on the land, but you don't pay on the structure that you're building. And that's been an incredibly important tool in revitalizing our community on a lot of the larger housing projects, but single-family homes, right? That's really helped the city of Cleveland to compete with the broader region and made it affordable often to build a home at a time when the community didn't have some of the financial strength it's starting to have. But with that in mind, the program has been in place for 15 plus years, and it was intended to be a one-size-fits-all program, and that made a lot of sense when we started. Now we want to examine the program. We have hired a team to help us ensure that how we're moving forward is based on sound data and information. We realized very early on that if we were talking about a program that's been very important to the city, we had to be really clear about the economic impact it's had to date. Yeah. Share with people who sometimes have not understood the program what exactly it is and what benefit it's been to the community to this point before we could be starting looking at recommendations possibly for changing it. I wanted to just step back a little bit and say that this started over the last almost 2 years ago. City Council and many of the housing partners like Cleveland Neighborhood Progress and Enterprise Community Partners were meeting to talk about equitable community development. And several of the folks on my staff were involved in those conversations. And we started to look at, what are the best ways to look at and ensure that development is happening across the city at multiple price points. It's natural that development initially is going to happen in pockets, but as community development and economic development professionals, we should be looking at what are the tools that we should put in place to try to spread that opportunity and that development out more.
So it's not gentrification.
Yeah, no, there's certainly, and there's a portion of this where we're looking at that as well, but we wanted to really look at what are the levers we have to ensure that there's more broad-based development. And the two that we have in our control and that are probably make the biggest difference in whether people make an investment is the land bank that we talked about, and the second was the tax abatement policy. And so last October we brought these different discussions that were going on together. We have strong city council participation, which is great. Community development is leading the effort with our planning and economic development departments and sustainability, because the green building standard is a part of the abatement. And the housing partners and many of the community development corporations are at the table. So now that I've rewound, while we initially thought, okay, we can do this ourselves, we have all this knowledge, we have all this research, we realized that if we were going to make changes in the policy or even begin to think about recommendations, we needed to do a great deal of engagement within the community. So there's the data that we'll get from analyzing the program thus far, then the engagement side, the qualitative side from residents, from multiple stakeholders, from the realtor community, the developers who have invested in our community, home builders, rehab, all the taxing entities that today contribute to the residential tax abatement. So we're at that point now where we've brought the consultant on, they're starting to do the data research. We will be coming out soon to begin meeting with the community, and we'll have several touch points where we'll present the data that we found and then recommendations, and throughout that process, be looking at best practices and benchmarks across the country. There are a handful of communities like ours who have changed their program in different ways, but none with a lot of history. So we're kind of going to be out ahead no matter how we slice or dice it. And then hope to have some recommendations with City Council by the beginning of 2020.
Have you had a lot of feedback from residents?
So the portion of the program I didn't talk about is where residents have spoken up the most, is that the other side of this is making sure that our long-term residents are protected as our neighborhoods get stronger, right? It's a wonderful thing that the housing values have gone up in many of our neighborhoods, but the challenge and what we have to make sure of is that as those valuations go up and property taxes go up, that longtime residents aren't priced out of their neighborhoods, that they're able to benefit from the revitalization where they have stuck with the city and stuck with their neighborhood through some of the difficult times, that we are able to, and again, we have seen in different parts of the country programs that either cap property taxes for people who have been in their homes a long time, who ease those property taxes in, some where the property tax doesn't go up until the house is sold. So that's the other component of this study, is to understand those are changes we'd have to make at the state legislature, but Columbus and Cincinnati and some of the other cities that we communicate with are looking at changes as well. So I think there'd be a lot of support for that movement. But again, we had to start with the research to get ourselves there, and to help bring the community along, because this is, as I mentioned, a tool that has been so important to the revitalization of our community. And we don't in any way want to hamper the growth that we're seeing right now by making changes to the tool, but we believe that by making tweaks to it, and again, we don't get too ahead of the research, but that there are ways to ensure that is still encouraging the development we've seen. I'm sorry, is encouraging the development that we've seen to this point, but also looking at development that can happen in some of our other neighborhoods.
And like you said, there's been a lot of wonderful development happening across the city.
Absolutely, it's a wonderful time to be in this position because there's enough strength in the neighborhoods, and we're seeing many things work that we can duplicate and move forward. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about the Department of Community Development?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. I think what it typically is people, as you mentioned when we started, only know one aspect, right? They only know that we support the community development corporations, or they only know about one program that we run. It tends to be that they don't understand the breadth and depth of what we do. And then I think the other piece is that our funds are primarily federal funds, and so really trying to help educate residents and partners alike about how positive that is, that we have these financial tools, but that there are limitations.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why the importance of getting private investors as well in a lot of these projects.
Exactly. And again, that's why I'm saying it's a nice time to be in this role, because there is a lot of private interest. And even in areas of the city where we're not quite seeing it yet, I think we're on the cusp of doing so. And it's incumbent on all of us, and that's what's really great is the housing partners like CHN Housing Capital and Cleveland Neighborhood Progress and our community development corporations and our economic development department. We're sort of all working together to help demonstrate the strength of our neighborhoods.
All the layers come together.
Yes.
Anything else you think people should know about community development?
Well, I think there are actually two things that I forgot to mention as I was talking about all of us working together. I think one of the nicest things for me coming into this role was that I came into the midst of the Mayor's Neighborhood Transformation Initiative that's led out of our development cluster, primarily led by economic development and planning, but building up the housing aspect of that. In Glenville, we've seen some real success in that there are homes being built by the private market now. The Finch development on 105 is about to open. And we will be quickly moving into focusing on Buckeye, looking at the commercial corridor in Buckeye and how we can strengthen that corridor. And then the other initiative that I meant to mention is the Fair Housing Act program that's come out of the Ohio Finance Agency that's helping us take our first steps in the Clark-Fulton neighborhood. We last year were really excited that the Ohio Housing Finance Agency decided that they had some extra low-income housing tax credits, that they would invest those credits in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, that they would give each of us $3 million in tax credits, which translates to $30 million of equity.
That's wonderful.
So it's a huge investment in the city and basically allow us as a community to choose the neighborhood that we put those tax credits into. The hard part is we had to choose a neighborhood.
And how do you do that?
Yes. Well, I have to say it was a really fun process. Easy for me to say, right, because I didn't have to put the presentations together. But we had 7 applicants, 7 sort of neighborhood areas. The requirement was pretty strict, but I think it made a lot of sense. It was meant to honor the Fair Housing Act. So it was really looking at communities that were quickly revitalizing, where you were seeing areas of improvement where it was starting to become more difficult to find affordable housing. So kind of on that cusp. So we have a handful of neighborhoods where that's the case today, but we had to demonstrate, or the neighborhood to demonstrate, that they had enough market rate activity to balance out the affordable activity, which is challenging. Yeah. And then had a real breadth of projects that wouldn't necessarily score well in the typical low-income housing tax credit rounds that OFA administers. So through interviews and some back and forth, a group that included some resident engagement, and many of our partners, we chose the Clark-Fulton neighborhood. And now are working through choosing our first group of projects. Part of the alignment was that Clark-Fulton is one of the Mayor's Neighborhood Transformation Initiative neighborhoods, because this was a place where we knew that then we could build on that momentum, really capitalize on the investments that Metro Health is making and the great work that Councilwoman Santana is doing in the neighborhood, and see some real improvement with Metro West and Ricardo Leone, who's doing great work in that community as well. So I didn't want to forget to mention those
definitely.
two initiatives.
That's wonderful. And Clark-Fulton is a neighborhood that's really on the rise right now.
Yes, there's great, you're seeing the entrepreneurship of the Hispanic community with the Hispanic Business Center. You can, kind of the excitement and the energy in the neighborhood is palpable, and really a long time coming in that Ohio City and Tremont and Detroit Shoreway that sort of surround the neighborhood have seen a lot of strength. Here's a neighborhood where it has a real distinct sense, and that's what made it a Mayor's Neighborhood Transformation neighborhood, because it's an area that really should have been seeing the type of strength and development, but wasn't, and is starting to with this work.
How do we get more information?
Just generally?
Yeah, with community development.
Yes, well, okay. Sorry, I thought you meant just for VET 50. So,
for all the things.
So I hope this is the beginning of doing more communication about our department. We don't do enough, I would say that, and I think that's something that we need to work on. You can always call our main phone number, 216-664-4000, to get connected with people in our department. There's some good information about what we do on the internet and then on the city's website. And we will be doing a great deal more community engagement in 2020. We need to submit our 2021 5-year action plan to HUD, and we are really intending to do a lot of planning and engagement during that time period to really hear from residents on what they think community development is in 2020, what they feel their neighborhoods need in the next 10 years, and we really want to listen to that and make sure that we are planning appropriately. So we'll be out talking to people a lot.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here in studio with us at TV20. It's been a pleasure, and I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers have as well. And as always, we will have this information for you at our website, tv20cleveland.com. Thank you again to our guest, Dr. Menesse. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Leah Longbrake. Until next time.